Does a car being super rare, like this 1959 Fiat Abarth Zagato, always equal big money on Bring a Trailer? Or does the fact that no one knows what it is gonna equal no bidders? Let's find out. Nerd! Bid Nerds is your daily YouTube card game show, where we predict the online auction results of the most interesting cars on Bring a Trailer, Cars and Bids, Hagerty Marketplace, and more. It's just like the Price is Right game show. Play along and see if you can beat the nerds.
All right, JP, our good friend Rafi Nigerian from the Pit Stop in Brisbane here in the Bay Area is selling a 1959 Fiat Abarth 750 record Monza with a Zagato body. And this car has a Bialbero powered motor. So most of these Fiats were 500 and 600 cc's, and they were single cam rear engine cars. And people started racing them in the, under 1000 cc category in sports car racing all throughout Europe, and doing really well because the cars were so light and they were so nimble and they handled so well. The cars were incredibly competitive despite being very, very low grade. You're talking about cars that were racing around Europe and this was not on like road courses. These are on, rallies and TTs and things of that nature. But the cars were just really competitive despite having like 40 horsepower. So Abarth would get involved. Abarth started modifying Fiat cars. And so some of these motors grew to 600 cc's. And then eventually these cars in the late 50s grew to be 750 cc's. But again, most of them were single cam motors. What's interesting about this car is the motor that is behind it. It is a 748 cc twin cam motor, thanks to Bialbero. And so I just cannot recall seeing any Fiat Abarth from this era with a twin cam motor, which makes this Monza Zagato super, super rare. So you've got, coach built body with the big, beautiful scoop. And then you've got this twin cam motor. And though I don't have, let's see if there's anything about the horsepower. I'm guessing the twin cam motor, might have made like a whopping 65 horsepower instead of 59. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it might be 10% more horsepower by switching to twin cam. In period, this car would have been in its category, sort of the, what do you call it? The ringer, you know what I mean? I think the car looks amazing in this sort of robin's egg blue colorway. There is a good video with Rafi behind the wheel. It sounds fantastic. It's just really, really adorable. And JP, these cars are so light that if you and I went up to the front of the car where the motor does not exist, and you held onto one chrome bumper and I held onto the other, we could pick the front end of this car up off the ground. It's that light. So really cool car, staggering prices. It is worth noting that this car sold for $230,000 on Bring a Trailer back in 2021. And at that time, it was an alumnus. But at that time, they would list it as an alumni, but they wouldn't put the hyperlink to where it had sold prior to that. So Rafi's got the car up there. It closes in a couple of days. It's a premium listing. And just a really cool little Italian car with all sorts of neat bits. It's certainly not a car for Sahan or for Rami, but JP on a back road, this car would raise an eyebrow or two. So I sent it over to you. I know your very first car was from the, I think, mid 60s. It was a Fiat 850 Spider. Man, I'm sure you could draw a lot of similarities between the tech that's on this race car in the late 50s and the production convertible that you bought from the same company less than a decade later, with a sub 1000 cc single cam rear engine, convertible. I bet there are a lot of not necessarily shared parts, but shared tech and shared specification. So, John, I send this little hot rod over to you. What do you think?
Yeah, it really is beautiful. I feel like anybody an Entourage fan out there, the brother of the main character, there an Entourage was about this big movie star, and then his bunch of lackeys that followed him everywhere, including his older brother who was obviously feeling a little bit, I don't know, he was always kind of bummed out that his little brother was outshining him. And when his brother bought a Ferrari, he's like, yeah, I love an Italian sports car. I miss mine. I love, and he's like, you had a Fiat, right? So I had a car that was similar to this, but I mean, it doesn't hold a candle to this thing. You're right though, looking at some of the components, stuff like that, like the fan in the back and the alternator and stuff, it's all the pieces, all the stuff that broke on mine. I can't imagine is any better on this one, but gosh, you're gonna have a whole heck of a lot more fun. Yeah, what a cool ass looking car. Wade, would you even fit in this thing?
I think I might be able to squeeze into this one compared to some other Fiats. It's a beautiful car. I'm not going to pretend to know anything about it, but I'm curious, what do you guys think is the bigger provenance for a car like this? It's like racing heritage, or the fact that this particular car is coach built, has history, being custom, special? Which side of the coin is more special with this car?
Good question.
That's a deep question. Yeah.
And I think Mental and I would agree that if Fiat, let's say, made 100 of these things with the Zagato body, which would be a lot. It's probably a number closer to like 25 or 50. So if they made, let's say, 30 of them, if 10 of those cars actually raced in period, in anywhere, whether it was in South America or in Europe or in the Middle East or even in the States, if this car raced at Sebring or Watkins Glen or any of these categories, back in the late 50s, those cars would be worth twice as much as the ones that didn't race. There's just no question about it. Even though those cars would have had a rougher life and are more likely to have had to have been restored because they would have been beat to snot, the provenance, the real value in the provenance for a car that was built with racing parts is the fact that it would have actually raced. And so this car does have a racing provenance, but I didn't study up on it. I didn't really want to delve into its racing history as much as just that it's like kind of a hand-built car that was special to begin with, but with that motor and with the Zagato body is more special still. And this is arguably one of the best examples in existence. So Mental, what do you think? Because you love to race, and I know you pride yourself on driving slow cars fast. Would you get it up for this car or what?
Oh, I love this car, and I want to show you guys how much. So last year, when the whole lot of us were out at Luft, of course, we got to take a tour of this shop, and I don't know if this is going to work. Yes, there is me. I am 6 foot, and that is how diminutive that car is. And even funnier is our buddy Dwayne Wick, who is 6'4". I've got to get this picture to come up, is standing next to the same car, and he looks like a giant towering over this thing. I love this car before it came up on auction. This is an absolutely just fantastic vehicle. I would drive this thing. I would want to drive it every day. Would probably fall to prey to the temptation often, but would be so scared I would get punted by a Dodge 1500 because somebody was on their phone. This thing's fantastic.
Awesome.
And you definitely don't want to come across a Hummer H3T on the freeway with one of these.
John, I actually think that if you could ramp this thing up into the back, it would actually park in the bed. In
the short little bed in that thing. It probably would, yeah.
To the track, yeah.
Well, my best friend in high school had what the heck was it? A Wildcat? Buick Wildcat?
Oh yes,
with a big motor. And like my little Fiat, if you parked it next to his Wildcat, the nose, I would park the nose like right up to the back of his door
window. Yeah,
just where the door ended, right? And then my car would and we'd line the rear wheels up with his rear wheel, and like it wouldn't even go all the way to the back. Like you could probably roll the damn thing into the back of a Buick Wildcat. So definitely do it in the back of an H3. I'm glad this is one of the situations where I'm glad that Deeb goes first when it comes to guessing the values or predicting the values. I have no flippin' idea. You mentioned the $250,000 before. If without having heard that number, I have no idea what this is.
You are not alone.
Yeah.
Half the nerd herd said they were waiting for Deeb's input before they would start throwing numbers out.
Right, which is why I threw that out there. So, JP, it's worth noticing when this car sold in February of 2021, I mean, the market was really just starting to move. But on BAT, when this car sold, February of 2021, and it made $230,000, John, that was on 46 bids. Can you imagine people were fighting over this car? At the moment, our car closes in 2 days. It's sitting at $185,000, and that is at the moment on just 5 bids. Here's the thing, John. You and I talk about seasonality for sports cars, like Rafi's white Alpha Spider that we looked at the other day and covered. And I think you and I would agree that if he could have waited 4 months, he'd probably get another $3, $4, $5 for that car. Easy, especially if the photographs would have been taken in the sun rather than the fog of the winters in here in the Bay Area. A car like this is so damn niche and appeals to such a crowd. This is really for millionaires who would be able to afford, $250,000 for a part-time pocket sports car from the late 50s out of Italy. That I think it levitates above seasonality. I don't think that there's an off season for a car like this because it's just so niche. They come up so rare. And to find one this spectacular with this many rare pieces, I don't think it matters that it is February. And I think part of that, too, is the proliferation of the importance of things like Barrett-Jackson in Arizona and Amelia Island, which is coming up here in another week or two down there in North Florida. Those things are doing well in what we used to consider the off season. So while this car is only at $185,000, it's only got 5 bids. I think this car is going to do well. I think it's going to bring a few dollars more than what it did last time. John, you can counter me and say that if it sold for $240,000, Rafi did not make $10,000 in this car. And that would be a very fair statement to say because of inflation and certainly because of all the money and hours he's poured into fine-tuning it and probably making it run better than it did when he bought it. But I'm going to give you $240,000 and say that it will sell for just a couple dollars more than it sold for a couple of years ago. I think it's unbelievably niche. I think it's in spectacular presentation. And I do think that Rafi and the pit stop actually have a quantifiable cachet. I think the fact that his name is attached to a rare high-end Fiat is going to help push this car to the sold category. The real question, because I didn't talk to him, is if he's sitting on a $250,000 reserve or what we might consider a slightly unrealistic want for the car. That I cannot speak to, but we will see in a few days when we cover it again. So JP, I give it to you at $240,000 in 2 days from now. Where are you?
Yeah, I mean, if this thing sold for $230,000 back in, what was that, February of 21, that was before things got really nuts. Prices were definitely on the uptick at that point already, but they weren't like bonkers yet. It would have been interesting to see what this car would have sold for in, March or February of 22.
Right.
Or the summer of 22. Would this thing have gotten somewhere in the 300 range? So with that in mind, if, with prices were going way, way up, and I think this was like the last dip before it took off in February of 21, I'm going to say that, yeah, because like we said at the beginning of the episode, are we back to that 2019 prices? I think in a lot of ways we are. So I think this car is going to be, I'll go 230 and say it gets to the same place. Okay. Yes, that's technically a net loss when you factor in inflation. But
license and transportation, it's a big net loss.
Yeah. So this car, but it's at $180 already, and I agree with you that pit stop cars definitely bring a premium. Wade, what do you think?
I'm going to spoil the party. I think this car is super niche, and I don't know if Bring a Trailer is like the best platform for a car like this. I mean, it's so special and so particular. I'd almost feel like a really high-end European live auction would be the best place for it. It's also kind of odd because, like you said, selling for $230,000 a couple of years ago, to some cars that would be low. To other cars, I think that's quite high, especially for like a niche car like this. I don't know, this could be a $300,000 car, but I can't imagine there's that many people out there that are specifically looking for this. I don't know that they're looking for this right now, post this car boom that we've had. I feel like a car like this is like almost sort of speculative in a way. And I don't know that we're at those high speculative prices again. I'm going to go under 200 on this, unfortunately. I think it doesn't sell. I think it hits 195, and I think he should pocket it and save it for a more special auction in the spring or summertime.
Wow, you think it's only going to bring another 10 grand in the last 2 days?
That's what I firmly believe. I hope I'm wrong, but it's just knowing nothing about this car, but just kind of analyzing the market and kind of where things are. I mean, we're not seeing tons of cars go for more and more and more consistently. And in the last show, you brought up an interesting point where some days reserve not met hits a lot of cars. I don't know if that's, a couple of days from now. I don't know if this car falls under that category, but it's not like we're seeing more cars sell for more money right now.
Yeah. Mental, what do you think the number?
Oh, I think that I'm going to optimistically say 245, because I think that the shop that this is coming from is going to reach a bigger audience than just Bring Your Trailers On. I agree with Wade. This is probably not the best platform for that, which is an odd thing to say because they do have the biggest reach, but you really need, something like this has global appeal, and it needs to be out there a little farther. And somewhere earlier in there, they said this one should have gone to Amelia Island. And I do agree.
Well, yeah. JP, you made a thing where you said in 2022, in March, what would this car have brought? And I think that's a really great question. And I would have furthered that by suggesting at that point, do you take it off the online auction and take it to Amelia Island in March of 2022? Would this car have got $285,000, $300,000? The answer is probably yes. And I think at that point, it's dressed for a live auction. It's ready for a more international audience than even BAT is capable of. So really great
there's
points.
only so many people in the world that want one of these, right? That's what we're all agreeing on. But I feel like all of those people know Rafi. Literally, I'm not, I'm not being funny. I mean, because if you own this car, he's literally the only person in the world that knows how to fix it or do anything to it. So, or maybe there's one other guy in some other continent. So it's like, I'm almost surprised that Rafi even needs to put this car on a market at all. Like, this feels like the kind of car that Rafi would just be like, he'd tell one guy that this car is for sale, and that would immediately get to the 6 or 7 other guys that want it. And then, go for why bother going through the trouble of auctioning it? I don't know. What do you guys think out there in the nerd herd? Do you guys think this thing's going to bring the same money it brought last time? Do you think it's going to bring the big money? Do you think Rafi's selling it at the wrong time? Are prices back to 2019? Let us know in the comments below. Hey guys, I got to tell you about our friends Godden Porsche of Las Vegas and Godden Classic. If you're looking for a new Porsche or a classic, you got to call our friend Steve at Godden, this guy.
1989 linen gray metallic G50 cab.
Is that going to be for sale?
It is going to be for sale. The car only has 65,000 miles on it.
Save yourself the hassle of screwing around with all the auctions like we always talk about, and just talk to Steve. He'll find you the classic Porsche you're looking for. Godden Porsche of Las Vegas. Hey guys, you're probably looking at your watch and wondering if Bid Nerds will ever end. So you better talk to our friends at Our Smiths to make sure your Rolex, Tag Heuer, AP, or any fine timepiece is in tip-top shape. Our Smiths, fine Swiss repair.
Several days later.
All right, so JP, this is an interesting story. So we looked at a car that is, being represented by Rafi Nigerian from the pit stop in San Francisco. What we're talking about here is a really cool Italian race car, a 1959 Fiat Abarth 750 record Monza Zagato body. And this car is propelled by a, let me read it to you, 750cc twin cam motor, which is unbelievably rare. The twin cam, I'm sure on paper doesn't add like a lot of horsepower, but from a driving feel, from a sensation of revving that car out, it is going to be completely unlike the single cams that came in 99.9% of all the other Fiat 750s and 600s from this era. This car is super, super rare with that motor. Magnesium parts throughout, twin Weber carburetors, and the company that built that motor was Bielbero. So it's a Bielbero-powered 750cc with the twin cam. So an unbelievable driving car. Love it. So we looked at the car. We saw that the car had sold previously on Bring a Trailer, presumably by somebody that Rafi knows, for $230,000 back in February of 2021. And at that time, the car received 46 bids, which is a lot of action for a car this unbelievably niche. So we wonder what was going to happen here. The market is soft. It's an election year. It's the dead of winter. I proclaimed that a car like this would be seasonally exempt, that it's so niche that if any of these ever came for sale at any time of the year, the people around the world that might be shopping or interested in a car of this nature, of this price, of this rarity, somebody that could afford to take it and run it on events around the world, wouldn't care what time of the year it was, they could pull the money to get it. So with that in mind, I thought the car would do better than it did before. My guess was $240,000. JP took the under at $230,000, and Wade, who admitted that he doesn't know these cars very well at all, took a very pragmatic $195,000, and we'll jump to him to ask why he came up with that number. Mental took the over at $245,000. So here's where it begins to get interesting. It failed to sell at $185,000 on 5 bids. And if my memory serves me, John, that's where it was at when we covered it. So it doesn't sound like it got another bid before the close of auction. However, Yuri is in studio. Yuri works with Rafi. Yuri, what can you tell us? What can you disclose post-sale after the hammer fell and it failed to sell at $185,000? What happened after that?
The car found a new home, and even more significantly, it did so with somebody that Rafi is happy is the next custodian of the car.
That's awesome. So Rafi's happy. The owner of the car is happy. The new guy that bought it is happy.
Yeah, I think that's the most unusual part about that too, and I think it's probably somewhere in the same vicinity of what it went for before. I would have taken the over actually also on that, but
so let's go back to Wade, because Wade, as far as the result on the auction site, you nailed it because the car came in at 185. You were at 195. Remind us again what went into that decision when you gave us that number.
Yeah. So, first off, I'm not going to gloat about being right about a car that didn't get all the money that it should have. Arguably, this car is worth a lot of money, and I'm glad to hear that it did sell and it found a new home with somebody who's going to fully appreciate it. My bid wasn't reflective of the car itself or anything about it. It was just sort of the platform, and I think maybe the lack of appropriate eyeballs for a vehicle like this right now. At the end of the day, this car is for sale on a big platform. And I think if you know of this car, if you want this car, you're going to know it's for sale. Yeah. But I also think that there's a good chunk of people out there in the world, especially overseas in Europe right now, that are probably not browsing Bring a Trailer in the middle of winter when there are other things going on. I still firmly believe that a place like Amelia Island or some, like Sotheby's or some place that kind of curates the best of the best, really interesting cars like this would have been a nice platform to list it, especially in the spring or summertime. But at the end of the day, I'm glad to hear that it did sell. And I think more than anything, it probably just maybe propped up this car a little bit more still. And I think that number just didn't reflect the car itself, just sort of a combination of other factors. So that's what it came down to for me. And I do think this is at least a $250,000 car. It's a beautiful build, very special, coach built, racing heritage, all sorts of things. So I'm glad to hear that it got a nice number and a good new owner that'll appreciate it.
We can't quantify what Wade just said because we don't actually know what it's sold for. But I would say that at a place like Amelia Island or in Monterey, which are the two really premier auctions in the United States every year, it is theoretically possible that the car could have brought even a premium over whatever it did sell for. So I think that take is great. I think that is the right place. Rafi is very well versed on buying and selling cars at the top auctions around the world, not just for himself, but for his clients. So he's aware of that, yet he still chose to go this route. Certainly the car was an alumni, and whether directly or indirectly, it led to the car's sale. So I think everybody won. But there you go. Wade got that one, JP. Any thoughts before we move forward?
No, just real quickly, I would just say that, look, it, like I said on the other side of this thing, Rafi knows a lot of people. And there aren't a lot of people that know what this car is. And however many people there are that even know that this thing exists, probably no Rafi, and this is just a good way to put the car out there so that people knew that it exists. The thing I'm more concerned about here is for anyone else that has one of these, now there's a low comp on the books out there that does not necessarily represent what this car actually sold for. Right. And if you are someone maybe 6 months from now and you discover this car, maybe you didn't know what it was, and now all of a sudden you're like, oh, I want one of those. What's it worth? And now you're going to look on BAT for a comp and you're going to find this one. What kind of information is that giving you? What kind of information is that putting out there on this very, very rare car where it's hard to find comps anyway? At that point, I mean, this is why it's always do your research, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a car like that, you're going to basically go, all right, well, it sold from this dealer, it sold from this guy. That's probably the only guy in the world that can actually fix it if I do get one. So maybe I should call this guy anyway, and maybe you can get the real 411 if you actually talk to him. Yuri, if someone were to call Rafi off of this ad in a month or two and say, hey, I just bought one of these, or I'm buying one of these, would Rafi do you think he would be forthright with the information, or do you think he would hold that tight to his vest? What do you think?
I'm certain he'd be forthright with the information. Otherwise, being able to access his time is a different story. And the one thing I wanted to say, and it's awesome how each one of you, I couldn't add anything to all the viewpoints you just offered. And I think that's the most interesting thing about this car on this platform at this time. So it makes sense at Sotheby's or on a stage like that. This one, Bring a Trailer, is not the only place that you should look at if you're researching. Be exhaustive. And at the same time, it gets the car out to a broader audience who wouldn't normally know it. So all of that stuff coalesces in the same piece at the moment. I think that's the cool thing about this. And I don't know.
That's a cool compliment. It reminds me of one of the best movies of all time, Old School. When they went to have the debate. Do you guys remember that? And Will Ferrell's up there. He's the leader of the debate team. And, in the movie, he's just an idiot, Frank the Tank, right? And then the other team, they wind up having like James Carville, the
Raging Cajun,
the Raging Cajun, the press secretary for the Clinton administration, right? Yeah. Arguably one of the
from Tulane, a professor from Tulane, Mr. James Carville. And they're like, oh shit.
And Will Ferrell gets up there and he just goes in, empirical evidence shows that, and he just like gives like the perfect answer, and they send it off to Carville, and he's like, I have nothing to add to that. That was perfect.
That was perfect. And he's like, and Will Ferrell like snaps out of it like, what
happened?
Yeah,
you did good. He's like, we did good. You did good. All right. So but look, that's kind of rare for this show. That's a very nice compliment. Thank you, Yuri. We are idiots. Do not take our advice, for the record. Okay, let's move on to the next card, because look, I think, again, the opening premise of the show is prices are still stupid. This is $180,000 got bid on a car that is incredibly rare, that hardly anyone knows anything about, and it still brought $180,000. Yeah. And then after the failure to actually hammer on the auction site, an after sale was made, and we assumed that was much, much higher.
Right. Yeah, he said no to 185 and then held out a week to get like arguably another 40 to 60 grand.
Right. So, there it is. If the market was in as horrible condition as the internet would have you believe, this car would be struggling to get $50,000. This is not 2008, which is what was happening back then. No one had any money. Crypto is on a tear right now still. The stock market is, the Dow is really high. There's still tons of money getting printed and getting put into the system. Inflation is still a thing. You could make an argument, and we talk about that all the time on this show, that, okay, even if this car did get 100, let's say it got 50,000 more than it was actually bid at, that's arguably the same money from 4 years ago, 2019 prices. So that's another thing that we've been talking about too. Hey guys, thanks for watching this clip of the Bid Nerds podcast. Play along with us live every Sunday and Wednesday night at 6:30 p.m. on YouTube, and see if your bids stack up to the rest of the nerd herd in the chat live. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you on the next episode. Nerd!
Get those words